Good evening. Good evening and welcome. Please take your seats. We're going to get going in about 2 minutes. So just want to get going on time. I know everybody's time is precious. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah.
Okay.
To everybody.
I still understand something. I just grabbed
Where's yours?
Okay. So then, yes.
Are you? Oh my gosh, I feel like a second class citizen right now.
I'm so excited.
I know, yeah.
I'm just going to sit here just like you.
Let's do that.
Good evening. Good evening. Welcome back to the JFC meeting of May 17th. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Welcome back, Bristol Warren colleagues. I didn't expect to be back with you so soon, but it's always good to see all of you. School committee members, school administration, teachers, parents, students, again, welcome back to the JFC meeting of May 17th. We are here for an historic investment in our school buildings that are long overdue for 21st century learning. As I walk through the halls, some things haven't changed since the mid-90s. Clearly, it's time to make an investment in our schools and our community. Colleagues, I want to remind you tonight that this is a non-binding bonding cap vote that bonding council will review with us in great detail. This is just one step in a multitude of steps that will get us over to the finish line, but we have a lot to do to get to that point. So again, thank you to the school administration and the school committee for moving the bonding process forward. Could I have a quick motion to accept the March 23rd, 2023 meeting minutes?
So moved.
From Carrie
Second.
first. And do I have a second?
Yes.
Steve? Tony, thank you, Tony. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. All those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Superintendent Riley, would you mind doing the introduction so my colleagues know who to address their
Absolutely.
questions over
I'm
to.
very
Appreciate
excited.
it.
I brought
Thank
you
you.
everyone who could answer all your questions so I can just listen to and not have to worry about it. So I'm very excited tonight to have our whole team here. So our OPMs are here. So Chad Crediton is here from PMA. We have chosen an architecture firm. Perkins Eastman is here to help us with the presentation. We've invited Mario Carena, who's the chief of the School Business Authority at RIDE, to also share with you some information about this process. As Tim said, we're at the beginning, but it's a very tight timeline, so I want you all to get that overview. We also have our bond counsel, attorney Sandy Mack is here. And I'm so excited our bond agent is here, Steve Massaroni, because I thought I was going to have to explain all the bonding to you, but we have him and he will explain all of that bit to you. So we have the whole team here and we have a presentation that walks us through the first piece of it and then a very brief presentation on the bonding that Steve will walk you through. So Chad from PMA, I think, is going to kick us off here on the presentation you see on the.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that really something I would emphasize?
Oh.
All right. So good evening. Thank you very much for having us. Very excited to be here and part of this project and looking forward to working with each of you for the coming years. So as Superintendent Riley had said, my name is Chad Crittenden. I'm a managing director with PMA Consultants. We are the district's owner's project manager for this project. We'll jump over to the next slide. With me here is the Perkins Eastman team, or some of the Perkins Eastman team. I'll introduce them in a moment, and they can run through some of their materials. So PMA and Perkins, we have great working relationship together. Those are 4 recent projects completed by the 2 firms together. One of them, very recent, actually up in the top right corner, just won a Construction Management Association of America Award today. One of the projects of the year for New England. Jump over to the next slide, and I'm actually going to let Mario from RIDE speak to the RIDE process because we have him here with us. Over to the next one, I'll turn it over to Mario.
Thank you. It's great to be here in Bristol, Warren, with all of you. It's been, I think, 6 years since I came back, so you're past due. So it's good to hear that you guys are moving forward on something really significant. So one of the unique things about our program is, unlike police stations, roads, bridges, the state will subsidize or reimburse school construction projects. They won't do that for other municipal types of projects. At a bare minimum, if you complete our process, you are guaranteed to get 63% reimbursement, which is very favorable. That's primarily because you're regionalized with Bristol and Warren, where you get an extra rate. Separately, you would each be at 35%. Additionally, the state is offering temporary incentives, which would get you as high as 80.5%. Those begin to expire at the end of this year. And I'll talk through the timeline, but again, at the scale of 200 million, that's about 35 million of state aid that would be on the table for you to take advantage of if your project were to qualify for. I haven't seen the details of your project. I'll see them tonight. But in essence, and I'll walk through our process, this is really a master planning process, the stage 1 and the stage 2. So essentially the way to look at it is, or the easiest way is like the legs of a stool of master planning. So what are the factors needed to understand your need? Well, number 1 is demographics. How many kids will you serve? Not do you serve now or did you serve 5 or 10 years ago, but how many will you have? And again, I haven't seen your enrollment projections. I don't know if you have a declining population. Statewide, we're down 20,000 students since the year 2003. You might be one of the ones who have been down, and if so, you would want to plan accordingly. One of the bonuses that's available through the state is known as newer and fewer for communities who are bleeding population. Rather than repair 2 aging buildings, it might make sense to build it with 1 efficient building. This is what North Kingstown and Socket and others are actively doing. Again, I haven't seen your enrollments, but something to consider. The other factors are educational program. Do you have the facilities that have the spaces for the programs you want to teach? So if you want to run automotive or science, do you have those spaces for your kids? And that would be a factor. The third factor of master planning is, what are the conditions of your existing buildings? Again, you would want, like, some buildings are worth investing in and some are worth just repairing. It doesn't make sense to throw good money after bad in many cases. And we have buildings throughout the state that are many over 100 years old. It's not worth just continually repairing the roof and the windows. You're better off, again, doing a new building. And then the fourth leg, which is the most important one, is funding. How much funding is available? And it's very exciting to hear that in this case, Bristol Warren has the resources to do something very significant. Many communities throughout our state aren't able to address their facilities, so it's very exciting for you. So our process, it's known as a 2-stage process. So stage 1 is when you identify your needs. That came in this past February. In essence, we look at the conditions of your buildings. You provide enrollment information. You provide your school building committee composition, which is critical. Again, for a regional district, it's a little bit different. For traditional districts, we always say, it's counterintuitive, but you want to put as many town representatives on there, since ultimately they're the ones who would determine whether a bond makes it on the ballot or not. Again, the regionals are a little bit different than that, but you have a nice representation here, it seems. And then between stage 1 and stage 2, that's when you come up with solutions to your needs, where you hire professionals who will actually do cost estimates, schematic designs, and you will actually identify what that $200 million will buy you. The one thing that is unique to the circumstances is, normally you do stage 1, you do stage 2 to figure out what that need is. that helps you determine the number of your enabling legislation, which then you take to the General Assembly and to voters. And there's 7 others like Bristol Warren who are flipping the order because you need to get General Assembly approval by this June in order to even have a question on the November ballot. So what many communities are doing, and I was in North Kingstown last week, is figuring out the upwards most limit of what you would consider issuing a bond for, and then working backwards from that number, again, to try to take advantage of those temporary bonuses that begin to expire at the end of this year. So we expect your stage 2 in September. One of the things that I would caution, since in many ways you are a little bit late to the game in that you just, I think, have hired an architect where others have been working on this upwards of a year, is of the 200 million, if the high school is the centerpiece, and that's very clear cut, I would focus on that. If some of the other projects are perhaps still wet cement, they can go in a variety of directions and they might bring this down. I would cut those loose and focus on the high school. But if those are defined and you have a very clear pathway for those, then I would advance them. I would normally, when architects are hired, they want to do their own assessments and visioning. You don't have that luxury of time. So unless you know exactly what you want, I would caution against doing that. The one thing to be mindful of is the General Assembly is in session now. There's been a great push from all the communities who are doing votes this year to extend those bonuses by 6 months. I know that many of them have done resolutions to their own senators and representatives, and that's being actively considered. I'm hopeful that it'll be extended, but there's no guarantee. I wouldn't bank on it, but it's a good chance that it'll happen. If that were to be the case, then that gives you options here for your stage 2. You would consider perhaps coming in February, if the bonuses were extended, to give yourselves time to really figure out how to best use that 200 million. But we'll see what plan is here. But I suspect that you would benefit from a little bit more time. You may or may not get it. That's just an advice. For North Kingstown, they cut everything but the middle school because they couldn't figure out the rest. Well, that middle school for them is a $150 million project. That just the bonuses alone were something that they didn't want to lose. So again, absent of any rule changes, you would send in your stage 2 application in September, so 4 months from 2 days ago, where we'll review it, we'll figure out a number with you, and that's the number the state will approve. You have a couple of choices because you will have already bonded or gotten voter approval for 200 million. Either we will approve a lower number, which is quite possible, then you can choose whether you want to do more work than that or just our number. We might approve all of it. Or we might prove you have needs, so it's not. We'll approve a good piece of it, but you'll have options. Then I would just be prepared. And I haven't seen your legislation, but are you prepared to issue some of your bond without any reimbursement? And if I were a taxpayer here, I would be against that. I would make sure that you only issue what the state approves, but you are welcome to choose to do that. Barrington and East Providence have chosen to go above what the state reimburses, but many others will only do what the state will reimburse. But that's a choice for you all to make. Again, if we were following the traditional process, we would know the number, and then you would decide what to take to voters. Here, we're working backwards from a number, which is perfectly fine because that's the only way to take advantage of state aid. What will happen is, and I'll just quickly mention some of the bonuses that are available now, which can help guide your project. This has been the driver for many districts around the state to help determine what they'll do. So the most common pathway of bonuses are educational enhancements. As you mentioned earlier, these buildings are not modern. So you have spaces that are desperate for an overhaul. So if you invest in either a library, a science room, classrooms, you get 5 bonus points. That should be a very manageable. With 200 million, you will get that. Health and safety, you have deficiencies in all your buildings. I suspect that 200 million will address those. You will get that. So that's already 10. If you can get your plan accordingly and start your work by the end of the year, you'd be at 73% reimbursement at a minimum, which is great. Then the question is, some of the other bonuses are a little trickier to get. It depends on your circumstances. If you have buildings that are either overcrowded or underutilized and you address that, you could potentially get another 5 points. I haven't seen your profile of buildings, but that's a possibility. And then if you do newer and fewer, like many other districts are doing, where if you have 2 old elementary schools and replace them with one, that's another 5 points. But you potentially can get up to 80.5% reimbursement. That's only for work that you hand in by September and then have under contract by the end of this year. So it's a really narrow timeline to get those bonuses. Now, again, if the General Assembly changes the rules, everyone's got more time. We're hoping that that'll happen because we anticipate 30 districts all bidding projects at the same time at the end of this year, which will wreak havoc with pricing. And we're hopeful that alone will get the General Assembly and the governor's office to move that deadline. And I'm not trying to bring doom and gloom. Like this is a great time to do work, to get 80.5% off, to get pay-as-you-go funding from the statewide bond, which allows you to do more without having to issue all 200 million, is very favorable. If
That's all right, Mario. When we get all of that, they'll just be happier with me. So
Okay.
you give them the maybe this won't happen, but
Yeah.
it'll all happen.
No, yeah, and we'll work with anyone to get this. Like we know these projects are needed. So this is not like it was during the moratorium 10 years ago. We were told to stop approving projects, give people a hard time. This is the reverse, where we don't want anyone to be left behind. So it's nice that you have acted quickly. You know, we hadn't heard from Bristol Warren, and when it came in February, we were very excited when the superintendent reached out. Stage 1 came in. You acted really quickly to get your team together. So it's clearly possible. It's just a matter of, again, the one word of advice is if the 200 million is, if you're not certain on parts of it, cut out anything that you think is going to weigh down the big prize, which is I believe it's the new high school here. That would just be a suggestion, which is what Barrington and North Kingston and others are doing. Don't let little things weigh down the big ticket here. Next slide. And then, so once you have RIDE approval, we have what's known as stage 3, which is design reviews. So we'll review the project 3 times with your design team. Many of those, and those aren't code reviews, those are really, number one, can we find ways to make the project more efficient and give you savings, is number one. And then number 2, again, we have many expert planners at RIDE who can find, ways to make it more educationally appropriate, which is a benefit to you. The communities who come in early actually are the ones who reap the better benefits. You actually sail through because we're aware of what you're doing. We provide feedback early on. The farther you get along with your construction documents, the more expensive it is to make changes and the harder it is. So if you can come in early, please do so. That'll greatly help you. And then once you have your reviews, you can begin with your construction. You'll have 5 years from RIDE approval to finish work, assuming you are targeting the bonuses in statute. Those have a different timeline and deadline. So for many, at the moment, it's December 30th of 2028. You want to make sure that all your work is done because you, I'm assuming, are trying to get those bonuses. If that wasn't such a big thing, whatever date we put on your memorandum of agreement, that will be your deadline. So you could have 2 deadlines depending on which. You have ours, which is the guaranteed for the 63%, but if you're trying to access those temporary bonuses, there's a separate deadlines in statute. And again, those are subject to change by the General Assembly in the next few weeks. And then again, as work completes, we will begin to reimburse your debt. So I think Steve will speak to this, whether you do 1 bond or 2 bonds or multiple bonds. The way the state system is set up is that if you have $1 million payment and you end up qualifying for 80% reimbursement, so in year 1, we'll put in 800,000, you put in your 200,000, and we'll pay, and that's tied to the life of your bond. Where it gets complicated is if you have 5 or 6 projects and 4 or 5 bonds, and they're all finishing at different times with different rates, it can get a little bit muddy. Some communities have made it, have treated this as like a financial exercise. They'll figure out which project can get all the bonuses and then have everything else aligned to that schedule. So the way statute is set up is that the bonuses can all be stacked upon each other, and you as the community can determine how many projects you have. Do you have 1 $200 million project? Do you have 2 $100 million projects? Do you have 100 projects? That's for you to decide. But what many have done is they'll figure out which of the projects can get the most bonuses, and then they'll use those as the pillars to figure out when they'll bond, how much they'll bond for, and then when things will be submitted to the state for reimbursement as the way to get the most. So Steve will go through this in a little bit, and we can have separate meetings on that. We do that commonly with districts who really want to maximize every state dollar that's available for their projects. And then, you have 5 years from right approval, and then your work will complete. But essentially, in a few minutes, that's the overview of our process. Are there any questions on the ride? Yes, sir.
The state, last year, they state bonded, I think it was 250 million.
Mhm.
Is that all that's available? If we take 200, that only leaves 50 for other communities, or?
That's a good question. So there are several mechanisms that'll fund, and I'll use your project as an example. So the primary funding mechanism is known as school housing aid, which is just reimbursement. So again, like that bond, what your bond payments will be reimbursed at whatever rate you qualify for. That's the majority of your project. We also have it's known as pay-as-you-go funding, which is money from the $250 million bond. There's a formula on our website, and I can crank it out, for you guys, but you'll probably get 15 million or so of pay-as-you-go funding. That is more favorable than housing aid because as you send invoices in, we'll turn around and within 1 or 2 days pay you. We pay faster than any state agency in Rhode Island. But again, that's limited because the state needs that money up front. So that's about 15% of your share of money should be expected through PAYGO. We also have the capital fund, which again operates very similar. That's a competitive application. And then we have periodic new programs that will come up throughout the year. But the main two really are the housing aid, which is General Assembly appropriations. That's not limited. And then we have the $250 million bond, which is limited. But again, that's only going to fund a portion of your project anyways. The bigger thing, and this is a nice rule of thumb, so when the statewide bond was passed back in 2018 and the more recent one, the pay-as-you-go funding is really valuable for communities who have limited resources. What's more attractive for a community like Bristol Warren are the bonuses, because that means more state money as opposed to money sooner. PAYGO is just money up front. So if you have access to $200 million, whether we pay you in a day or we pay you over the life of the bond, it doesn't matter. You'll get your money. What's more attractive is getting another 17.5% state aid that you otherwise wouldn't have received.
I just had a question in regards to RIDE. You mentioned earlier that may approve at a lower amount than, could you just expand on that? What
Yeah,
you
so
mean?
we have in our regulations at a really high level, and this is for new construction, so let's focus on your high school in this example. There are 3 numbers that will help determine what the state would approve. The first one is costs per square feet. So every year we post a number online of the approvable dollar per square foot that we would approve. We use regional research, we look at what the projects are coming in for, and we set that number usually in November. So we'll know in November what that number is. It's always higher than the year past. So this past year, it was $589 for high school, not including FF&E and other items, and we build up to that. That's the first factor. Is that the second one is enrollment. How many kids will you have in 5 years? And that can go up and down. We can determine a variety of factors, but that's a big driver. The third one is the number of square feet per student. So again, if you're doing career and tech programs, well, you get a bigger number. If you have a higher percentage of special ed students, you can get a bigger number. Or we can work with you on all 3 of them, and it's essentially 1 times the other equals the RIDE number that you get approved for. You'll have the choice then whether, if for some reason you can only substantiate 140, I'm making numbers up, 140 million for high school, and your team tells you it's 160, well, you have the choice of either building a very efficient building to getting to 140. You can say we're gonna do it for 160, but the state's only going to reimburse us up to 140, and Bristol Warren will each pay the overage. You're welcome to do that. There's a variety of factors there, but we'll know that number when you get approved. And again, this is where normally you would know our number and then decide what to take to the General Assembly and to voters. Here, because of circumstances, you have to set up a number and then work backwards from it. And then you can decide, do we actually want to issue 160 in this example, or do we want to make it work at 140? But that's a choice for you all to make.
Thank you.
No problem.
Colleagues, any other questions?
Great.
Thank you.
Mario, thank you so much. So I think the big takeaway there is schedule, right? Schedule is going to be very, very tight. We have 4 months to get that submission in on September 15th. And then a little bit longer than that to get things like construction manager on board in order to qualify for those incentive points. We're ready to ramp up, ready to go. The PMA team, the Perkins Eastman team are ready to go. We're beginning to line up meetings and stakeholder meetings. So I met with the school committee a handful of times already. Here at Joint Finance Committee tonight. Thank you. Next step will be lining up the building committee meetings. So we are going to get a schedule published for building committee meetings coming up. Very important to us that we keep all the stakeholders involved. The other thing that will happen a little bit more behind the scenes is an executive leadership team meeting on a weekly basis. And that's really just to make sure that the process keeps moving along and there's nothing slowing us down. There's going to be a lot of work that happens concurrently. So the existing condition assessment, a lot of the information is in the stage 1 report. I'll talk about that in a second. The educational visioning process will also be underway at the same time. So those dates were just set yesterday. So that we'll get those dates out to the community and get that published. That's one of the major components. All of that leads up to the selection of the preferred solution and then development of that preferred solution in time for the September 15th submission. Of course, estimates need to happen between preferred solution and the submission date. We'll jump over to the next slide and I'll just very quickly recap the stage 1 process and then give you a preview of the stage 2 process. So the stage 1 process is really, it's a thorough analysis of all the existing conditions. It looks at building size, building condition, building enrollment, building utilization as far as the design enrollment versus the current enrollment. It also goes in to identify critical building needs for all of the buildings within the regional school district. That report itself, it's over 1,000 pages. It is posted on the district's website if anyone wants to take a look through. A lot of great, very helpful information within that. We'll jump over to the next slide. And one of the key takeaways from that report is there are 134 individual projects identified in that report across the school buildings. Out of those 134 individual projects, over 94% of them were considered priority 1 and priority 2, which is really work that needs to happen right away. So the need is absolutely there. It exists in some capacity in each of the district's buildings. Next step of the team will be diving into that and prioritizing those needs and developing the preferred solution with those in mind and the educational vision of the school district. We'll jump over to the next slide. So Mario had actually touched on this. This is the RIDE Stage 1 preliminary approval letter. It came in April 27th. PMA came on board in April. The design team here tonight actually just interviewed last week, so hopefully we'll have a contract ready to go very shortly with them. But they're already going. They hit the ground running, so we're ready to go. One of the takeaways in that preliminary approval on the right, I know you can't read that, but it's looking for a little more demographic information. So that will be included as part of this stage 2. And then the hope there is that with that additional information, possibly opens up some additional reimbursement incentives for the district. We're going to hop over to the next slide. So stage 2, and again, Mario touched on this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. This is really identification and development of the preferred solution, and also simultaneously the existing condition evaluation, and then also simultaneously be the educational visioning process. So a lot of processes happening, but the team is ramped up. We're ready to go. And I think that's the segue into the stage 2. So we're just going to give you kind of a preview of what is to come in stage 2, so you know what to expect over the next several months. For that, I'll turn it over to the design team, and they can run you through that stage 2 preview.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Sure.
Jump right in, colleagues.
Before I forget, you had the slide on the stage 1 under the building repair needs. You said the identified cost for the repair of deferred maintenance projects is estimated to be $28.6 million. Does it mean that the balance would be the construction of a new school and 28.6 is the repair of existing buildings?
So that's just core repairs, warm, safe, dry. That doesn't address the actual education programmatic needs of the district. That's really just to button up everything in the existing buildings. So it's that's the bare minimum, sort of the warm, safe, dry, no educational program improvement.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions before I turn it over?
Thank you, Chad. I just wanted to say it's an honor to be here tonight. This is Lisa Pecora, who's our project manager on the project team. I'm Robert Santos. I'm the project architect, technical project architect. I'm going to give this programming and visioning and design presentation a bit of a shot here. This really, as we dive a little deeper into what stage 2 is going to be for us, the first most important phase is going to be the visioning and the programming. And that means we're going to be looking to set up an educational leadership team with the school committee. And we're going to be looking to really find out what the direction the school, the district wants to go is. Once we have that established, we can reach out to the community, to educators in the different schools, principals, and bring it all together. And we can start sitting down and having real deep conversations about what we want to see in our new high school. The goal for this whole process is to come up with a educational program, which lists essentially all the spaces that are going to be in the new building or in the new buildings and projects, and a summary of those spaces, which is basically a specification for an ed spec for those spaces. Next slide, please. This shows you briefly what we can do in this in the programming process. Just to kind of imagine what a new educational space might be. These 4 images show you essentially the same square footage of a classroom wing, of a team wing, in a school building. And you see the traditional classroom cluster that we might have all studied in ourselves when we were younger on the left. And as you look to the right, you see different ways of integrating the classrooms and bringing students together in new, more educationally appropriate ways for this age. I think the school in question here chose the model at the far right, which has a learning porch at the front of the classrooms to bring teams together. And allow educational interrelationships to occur. Next slide, please. And when we look at the Mount Hope High School, which we chose in our presentation, our initial presentation, to act as kind of a proxy for what we might do in a design project, we see a number of challenges with the site. Even though it's a lovely site, there are certain things related to wetlands, which you'll see in a moment. Next slide, actually. This is essentially a survey of the site showing the buildings in orange, in green, wetlands, and in blue, the Silver Creek. And you might notice on the screen dashed lines, which are wetland buffers. So you'll notice that those buffers and the wetlands and this creek itself all do pass through the school and create certain issues with flooding and other difficulties that might arise from being directly adjacent to the creek. So you have a nice parcel of land to the west of this. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, can you go back a slide? I just want to highlight something before you move on. One more. So I know Mario talked about a new high school, which would be super exciting, and we just mentioned it, but we're still looking at what is going to happen. So how you get there, it could be a renovation, a new construction, a hybrid. We just kind of went quickly through this. And I want to be clear, especially for the public, that the decision has not been made, that our choice is there's going to be a new high school. We're investigating what the best bang for our buck is going to be, which might be a version of that. I know you're going to get to it in the next couple of
Absolutely.
slides.
This is just really meant to be a hypothetical to show how a process might affect one of the facilities, okay? So we're looking at 3 options: renovation, new construction, or a hybrid of the 2. And right now on the screen is the renovation option, where you see that it's a multi-phase process, that students and teachers and educators would have to live through the construction as it proceeds, and that the floodplain will continue to be an issue despite the fact that any project has happened. So the wetland, the Silver Creek, continues to go under the building and through the bridges here. Right, the wetland we see right at the window here does present flooding issues. The boxes you see over the plan on the screen are phasing possibilities. Phases would be where the work would occur. So phase 1 might be a 1-year process. Phase 2 might be a 6-month process, whatever it is, and this would be worked out with contractor, CM, and the school board and district to determine the best course of action and the one that would be most efficient. It might mean that students would have to take up temporary shelter or would have to find a temporary space within the gym, for instance, while a classroom wing is closed down. But these are things that can be worked through and have been worked through in other projects. So that would be something we could do. We could, reno the buildings essentially, and make them safe for flooding as much as we could. Can we go to the next slide, please?
And under that plan, with the amount of water coming through, is that plan viable? I mean, it seems, I know some of the halls flood. I've heard people talk about it. I don't know,
We're working with pair engineers who worked on a flood mitigation project here on this very site recently. And we feel confident that it would be possible to mitigate to some degree, but we'd have to further study it and get back to you on specifics of what might happen.
Okay.
Yeah. What you're seeing now on the screen is a potential layout for a new construction. And you notice in this particular layout, the building has been demolished. The existing building has been demolished. The Silver Creek resides to the southeast of the building, and the building is more towards the center of the site. Next slide, please. This is looking to the northeast from the southwest. You'll notice the track to the left, which would remain. And next slide, actually. This is the same image. It just tags the different volumes you're seeing on the screen, such as the gym, the auditorium, academic wing, STEM wing, student commons, lobby entry. And what this does is it places the gym and the auditorium, which would be the more public spaces for the building, adjacent. The gym would be adjacent to the fields, for instance, and the auditorium and arts wings would be closer to the lobby to allow for community interaction. The plan here would bisect with a central circulation corridor going north-south, and to the east would be the quieter academic wings, which would be separate from the louder and more active gym and auditorium wings. Next slide, please. And this is a view looking the opposite direction, where you could see that those academic wings can be sited such that they can open up to nature, open up to the wetlands beyond, and still retain a very modern and educationally appropriate form, allowing light into all the classrooms. And one of the other important things about new construction is that this building can be purpose-built for taking advantage of geothermal energy, photovoltaics, sustainable options, and enhanced envelope construction to really provide the most sustainable, energy-efficient building that you could imagine with today's technology. It would be safe and secure according to your needs, which we work out. Lastly, what we want to ask with this slide is does the new high school even want to be in this site? Does it, or is there another site that we should look at? So, those are questions that would come up.
And I'm sorry, before you move on from this, this is just a box design of what a new high school would like. I don't want anyone to think that this space deck is what we're thinking a new high school would look like, but this is just to give you an image of what the wings would look like.
Hypothetical, yeah.
Just a generic building. So, yeah.
Exactly.
But again, because we have folks from the public who may be watching, I want to be clear about what some of the things on the slides are.
Could I ask that we turn one of these speakers towards this committee? It's really difficult to hear you.
I'm sorry, should I?
No, okay. Thank you.
Apologize.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
And maybe because I didn't quite catch it. If, maybe it's not decided yet, if you do new construction, would you do like East Providence where they just moved in on the site, they kept the old high school while the construction was going on, and then you build a new building?
That would be one of the ways we could approach it, and probably be the smartest way to do it for everyone
And then
involved.
you get away from the floodplain, would you?
Yes, that would be the
Or
goal of.
the wettest area?
That would be the goal of this particular layout, yeah, and why it was cited as such in this, and again, hypothetical white box model. Next slide, please. And then we have a kind of exciting idea here, which is a hybrid solution, which is a partial renovation and partial new construction. What it does is it proposes that because you have an auditorium here at the Mount Hope High School and you have a gym, that these large box spaces could be gutted. The buildings could be reclad, the interiors could be refinished while you maintain that original structure, but then you remove the old classroom wings, the old cafeteria, and you rebuild those on the other side. You'll notice that in this layout, next slide, please. In this particular layout, looking from the southwest to the northeast, you'll see that unlike the new construction, we can't then adjust the location of the gym and the auditorium to work better with circulation or with the location of athletic facilities in the fields. But it would provide a number of new academic wings, STEM wings, libraries, et cetera. That would be, the same standard of quality in the new construction, but still we might be able to save some money with the salvaging of the gym and the auditorium in this particular option. Next. And this is just looking back. Next, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. So as part of that analysis, we'll also be looking deeply into the costs. So each of these scenarios will kick over to an independent estimator that specializes in K through 12 schools. We'll have them model up, price each of the options. We'll map out schedules for each of them. As you can imagine, things like a renovation, having to move from space to space, and you have to time those moves with certain breaks in the school schedule. All of that kind of plays into this. So all that will be mapped out and be included in the cost projections. So the cost projections will be developed. These are just a hypothetical sample here. Presented to all the committees, get the committee feedback, make sure that we've put all the options on the table, and we identify and select the most appropriate preferred solution to move forward with. And jump over to the next slide. Another thing that plays a very big piece of this is the ride support. So certain options may or may not be eligible for certain incentives. So that's something that also plays into not only the overall project cost, but what the projected district share is for Bristol and Warren. So equally as important to the taxpayers and the stakeholders in the community, of course. So the base rate, as Mario stated, 63%, and that could go up as high as around 80% with incentives and bonuses. Jump over to the next slide, please. Also important, and we touched on this quickly, is ineligible costs. So we need to understand what costs in each of the solutions that are being reviewed might be ineligible for reimbursement. Mario had mentioned that cap of $589 a square foot. That certainly plays into things. There's a whole host of ineligible costs that we need to just be mindful of. So when we map out the total project costs and what the district share projections might look like for each of those scenarios, all of this will be factored in and included when those numbers come back to the community and the committees. Next slide, please. Budget development is really very simple. The state has this great template. The template is really driven off construction costs. So the construction costs come from that independent estimator that specializes in K through 12 schools. From there, it's really just applying percentage markups generally, industry standard markups. So design engineering, management, commissioning, furniture and technology is an allocation per student. Other project costs, you might have something like legal fees, move costs, things like that. And then, of course, applying the appropriate project contingencies for the preferred solution. So your contingency, as you can imagine, on a renovation scenario might be a little bit higher as a percentage than it would be on a new construction. So again, all of that comes back down to your bottom line and that important decision on what that preferred solution looks like. Next slide, please. And jump right through this. So we'll touch quickly on project schedule, and then I'll turn it back to Perkins, and they can talk a bit about their work plan. So you have a deeper dive into what to expect in the coming months. So the architect procurement in April, just wrapping that up, hopefully contract very soon. But as I said earlier, they are running, they're moving, we're working. The departmental planning coordination meetings will be very intense for the month, the remainder of May and then into June. Existing condition evaluation, so things like traffic study we want to get done before the schools get out. That's when we get the best data. Identification of the space needs and program development is going to happen very fast too. So again, early summer. And then that will lead to the selection of the preferred solution or solutions. Construction delivery method in order to attain that incentive point for having the CM on board by the end of the year. That decision will happen over the summer, and then the RFQ will go out for construction managers at risk in order to get them lined up and ready to go come December. All of that is really tied back to that submission date, that critical date on September 15th, when that stage 2 package goes into RIDE. From there, longer picture out, detailed design generally takes around a year, depending on what the preferred solution is. And the construction window obviously is heavily dependent on what the preferred solutions are. I'll let the Perkins team talk a little bit more about their work plan schedule in a little more detail.
Thank you, Chad. So can you all hear me? I'm a little shorter than all the other guys. So as you guys can understand from what everybody's said tonight is we have a very aggressive schedule ahead of us for stage 2, but we're very confident and have already kicked off a lot of things to get started. So before I kind of talk a little bit about how we've kind of set up the work plan, I just want to hit on a few of the things that we've kicked off or started to kick off, or things that we're really starting to establish at the start of the project. Starting with our confirming a weekly meeting with our executive committee, because we want to make sure that we keep everybody engaged throughout the process so that it's holistic and everybody knows what's going on at every point in time. We want to make sure we engage the district, find out what your priorities, your goals and values are. That's really important at the start of these phases so that it gives us just a great amount of direction so we can move forward through helping you get the type of school that you want. We've started to look at some times, hopefully next week, to get our team out on site so we can walk through all the buildings, start to build off of that stage 1 facilities assessment that's already been established. That way we can take a look and start to prioritize all the needs throughout all the schools. After that, actually, we kicked off an educational programming and vision meeting yesterday with Anna, and we did establish 3 dates for visioning, which I'm working on a little flyer that we can give to the school district so that we can get that word out to the community for towards the end of May and middle of June. And then we'll hopefully get an educational executive team together so that we can continue to develop the educational programming throughout the process. We'll be engaging Urbatronics, who will help us with our demographics so we can confirm our enrollment projections. And also, as was mentioned earlier, we've got VHB, one of our consultants, on board to start our traffic study before summer break hits. Actually, we probably even want to look to try to get it something going before the seniors all start to leave school, which is coming up not too soon. So
I just have a quick question
Yeah.
in regards to the district committee meetings that you're having. Who are the stakeholders involved in that district meeting? Is it just the school, or are we also involving a whole building committee? What?
I think it's up to the district. I know typically in the past when we've done our executive committees, we've, it was important to always have the leaders from the schools, the facilities, sometimes even the finance or the business director from the school involved, but that I'll leave up to the district to tell us who they want.
So we're just working on the educational programming piece of it, and then we bring that to the building committee. So then we'll work with Chad to schedule the building committee meetings. So we're just providing the educational information and programming to then help guide the construction.
Thank you.
But there will be check-ins along
Yes.
the way with the school
Building committee and school committee.
Yep. So, okay, and then also it's important for us to kind of gather and pull together an integrated design team so that we can establish our high performance goals and healthy materials initiatives and stuff for the school. So looking at the schedule, what we did is we actually broke the schedule up into phases, 4 phases at the start. Phase 1 is the master plan phase, which where we really start with that, and we already have started, is really diving deep into the stage 1 report, understanding that, and then now trying to build off of it with our facilities assessment as we start to walk through the school buildings. We'll get the educational programming and visioning underway, start to develop some master plan options, confirm all the goals and values, and then get consensus from the district, and then complete our master plan and our ed spec. So while phase 1 is in process, we actually need to begin phase 2. And phase 2 really focuses on what the project's going to be, whether it's a renovation, new school, or however we decide early on to move forward from. So we'll start by developing site and building options, in which we'll share with the stakeholders. Then we'll select an option. So once we have an option selected, we can begin schematic design drawings, develop narratives for our MEP systems, and then get a cost estimate. So then we can bring costs back to the stakeholders and review it, and then get our budget established, and then complete our stage 2 process. There's a lot more involved in there, but I just thought I'd give you the summary portion of it. So, and then next slide. So phase 3 is really our support phase. Our stage 2 submission has been issued. We'll be there to review any comments or respond to any comments that RIDE might have on our stage 2 submission. We'll be working with you to evaluate and select a construction manager for the December deadline, and then helping you prepare for the November 7th vote. PMA will probably talk a little bit about that next, but together PMA and Perkins Eastman will be working with the community or with the school district to really develop ways that are best to do community outreach for both the towns of Bristol and Warren. And then in phase 4 is really the continuation of schematic design, which kicks off stage 3, which would be after we have approval from our November 7th vote. So, any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
just one question.
of course.
We've been talking a lot about the short timeline. So has your firm ever dealt with these tight timelines before? Is this like a regular thing for you guys, or are there a lot of other worst case scenarios besides this?
It's a challenge. We're not, we've been challenged like this before on many school projects. How we're going to approach it is we're going to more or less divide and conquer. We have our team that's going to focus on the master planning part. We have our team that's going to focus on the new project part, and a manager that's kind of coordinating between the two of them, so that both groups can kind of move forward together and keep up with everything at the same time.
So you've done this before?
Yes, we've done this
Okay.
before. Yep. So we're actually a fairly large firm. We have lots of resources. I work out of the Boston office. Rob's actually working out of the Rhode Island office. And we have people from New York, people from Connecticut, in which we all worked on many projects together remotely. And we've had some great success throughout. So, do you want to add anything to that, Rob?
Any other questions? Yes. Okay.
Just a quick timeline question. Is the facility condition index, is that part of the stage 1 or the stage 2 assessment?
So the start of the facilities assessment is part of stage 1, but there's a continuation of it in stage 2.
So it would be stage 2 when it's determined if the score is achieved that would allow for the extra bonus through RIDE? That would be part of phase 2?
Correct. You want to have that?
No? No, it's phase 1?
Right now, a separate process to be
It's to the chair.
If you don't mind.
So the question is, as it pertains to the bonus in statute. So the state in 2017 did a statewide assessment, which gave everyone a score, a facility condition index score. Anything over 65 is considered replacement candidate, meaning it would be prudent not to invest any further there, but consider a new build. Because that was 6 years ago, we allow districts to update or challenge that. So we're in the process of doing another statewide assessment, though that will finish outside of this timeline. What you can do is, and I'll email the superintendent, there's a form where you can challenge it now. What we do is we deduct from your housing aid payment in September. The communities that challenged it this year, it came out to like $7,000 or $10,000. It was a small amount that, 5 points on 200 million is worth pursuing over a $10,000 reassessment. So I'll send you the form, and then it just requires a school committee chair and the superintendent sign it. We'll engage a architect. They'll come and they'll do an independent assessment of your high school, and then we'll figure out what that new score is, and then that would be whatever the new number is would be the one.
Thank you.
Yes.
So everything is moving towards this vote in November, and there's a lot of work going on now. not to throw a wet blanket on it, but should the voters decide that this isn't the direction they want to go in, what happens to all of these costs that we're building up now?
So I would suggest, so far, is this a one project application, or do you have other things?
Nope, it's multiple, it's all schools.
Multiple. So there are two types of ways to fund projects. One is through a bond, and then that has the repercussions that it could fail in November and it could get approved. The other mechanism is known as capital reserve funds or cash on hand, and I'll mention that in a minute. I would suggest that your application include some capital reserve funded projects. What happens is if you do all this work and spend all this money and it's all bond funded and the voters reject it, you don't have any right approvals, which means you will pay for their services 100% out of your budget. However, if you have capital reserve approval, that doesn't go away. The moment you get right approval, that's not contingent on the General Assembly or contingent on voters, because you need to have some sort of resources to actually begin with projects, but that approval doesn't go away. So at least you'd have some mechanism to reimburse their fees. I would also suggest, and I mentioned this at the school committee meeting, the annual one a few weeks ago, is consider doing a revolving capital fund where we have many communities in the state who are starting to do this. So I'm a school committee member for Lincoln. So full disclosure, we have one in Lincoln. What it means is if you have $1 million and you want to do a roof at one of your elementary schools, well, at a minimum, you're going to get back 63% in 1 year from RIDE for that work. Well, if you have a plan in place, when you're approving $1 million for that roof, at the same time, you can already approve the second, third, and fourth uses of that money. So when $630,000 comes back to you in year 2, it's already earmarked to be windows somewhere else. It's going to be $400,000 for a sidewalk in year 3 and $250,000 somewhere else. So every $1 million that you pay out of capital reserves does $2.5 million worth of work over a 5-year period. That's without any bonuses. So I would suggest, as you're parceling through your projects, some projects are worth bonding for because there's no other mechanism to do so. I would not bond for warm, safe, and dry projects because you're adding 50% financing costs to all of these. Even though the state's reimbursing you 70% or so, if you can do them through other means, it would be better for both the state and, again, for your local taxpayers not to bond for things that don't have useful lives of at least 20 plus years. So in the long and short of it, as you wrap up your stage 2, you'll have projects that equal up to 200 million, hopefully, and then some other piece of capital reserve, even if it's 5 or 6 million, just have some number there. 2 communities who learned the hard way. One was Westerly, the other one was South Kingstown, who had their projects rejected. They were responsible for paying everything up to that date, and they didn't have any capital reserve. Westerly then turned around and learned. They actually took 3 tries to pass their bond. The second time, they at least had a capital reserve, which let them at least do some work. And then at the third time, their project passed.
Do we have capital funds?
We have a revolving fund for capital. So because we're a regional, so when we do exactly what Mario said, so if we have $1 million project, we get 63% reimbursement. We put that back into our capital fund and we use it to fund the next project. So we already do that because our community had it built into the enabling legislation that those funds come back to the district.
Okay.
So that is how we fund them. So we had a previous 5-year plan that was approved by RIDE, and we've been doing projects. We this year did the roof at Katerra School, and we did some safety and security in the buildings. And in just a few weeks, we'll be submitting those for our reimbursement so that we'll get our 63% reimbursement on those. So we already do that. By the nature of our enabling legislation, it was already set up that way.
All right. And then is all of this planning, pre-planning, and then the ultimate goal based on spending the full 200 million, or?
No, that's a cap. So this is setting like the not to exceed cap. And I know Steve will talk a little bit more about this when he talks about the bond, but this is kind of saying, if we were going to bond, we're going to look at all this stuff, but that is the maximum amount. The goal is not to get to the maximum amount. It's kind of like setting your budget. We don't want to spend more than this. The goal is not to spend that. The goal is to see how much lower we can get, but knowing we're not going to be able to go higher than that. It gives us a target rather than just having no number to give us an estimate of what's doable for the district.
And these pre-approval costs, do we have a budget? What's the budget on that?
I'm not sure what you mean by the pre-approval
All of
costs.
this design and consultant.
So our OPM, our project manager, we were using our capital funds to pay for those services.
Can I just say, to clarify, I think I'm correct here, is the reason that we're asking for a $200 million cap is because of the legislature needing to get to legislature in order to get approval to go out for a special election. And because it's already May, middle of May, we have to get something into them relatively soon.
Correct,
Is that right? Yeah.
correct.
That's good. Does that answer your question, Kurt? Okay. Nathan, question?
Thank you. So recap real quick on those critical dates there. September 15th, we've heard a lot. That's the submission deadline for stage 2. September 18th is the Board of Elections approval of the referendum. And then November 7th is that referendum project funding authorization vote. Hopefully looking at RIDE stage 2 approval on or about December 19th, and then the CM on board by the end of the year for that incentive. So big picture, key dates, those are them. Jump over to the next slide. And I know a lot of people in the room have heard this for now the second time in 48 hours, so I'll move through pretty quickly. Project communication to PMA and Perkins is of the utmost importance. So we place a heavy focus and heavy emphasis on making sure that we get the information out to the community and all the committees and boards and all the stakeholders. So social media accounts, project website, video updates, and I'll show you a couple examples on the next slide. So this is a local community event. So generally what we'll do is set up a table and really just make ourselves available to ask questions. Might be a takeaway handout flyer that just has information about the project, might have cost information, really describes how the project got to where it is at that point in time. On the next slide, we can see another couple of examples. So mailers on where to find information. So not everybody has social media. Not everybody is checking the website frequently. So another approach that we've taken in other communities is actually mailers, and not to provide information about the project, but where to tell people where to find information or where to hear information or have an opportunity to ask questions. On the right side is one of those handouts. So once people actually show up and they've expressed interest in learning more, we can make a document like that available to those interested people. And on the next slide, another approach here, social media, of course, is an incredible tool as we work through these referendum votes. Just samples from another recent project not too far away. So some of the things we can do is put like a tax impact calculator, not only on the project website, but also out on social media. We make sure that we're engaged. Not only are we pushing content out to people that are looking for that content, but we're also kind of watching the tone about the project and making sure that we identify and address anything that might be just incorrect, infactual information that inevitably gets out there. So really a proactive approach and a very important component to the PMA and Perkins teams. And on to the next slide. I think this is the final slide. It doesn't stop at the referendum, continues throughout the entire duration of construction. So on the left, that's design phase, really keeping the community updated on where the design development was on that particular project. And then on the right side is actually a video tour during construction while another K-12 school was going up. So we have a PMA project manager lead the video tour, and then we have another project manager who's actually monitoring the comments and answering questions live as they're coming in. So very important to us. And I think that concludes. So thank you very much for your time, and happy to answer any questions. I will turn it back to the chair. Thank you.
Colleagues, do you have any questions, additional questions? I just had a question on the website in regards to could residents sign up for notifications to get regular notifications of how things are progressing? And
Yep, they
there's
could.
like
We've absolutely done that, and that would be an
Okay.
option. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, I
thank
think,
you.
Steve, you're up next. Can you put up the other presentation? Thank you, Joe. And just, I know I introduced a lot of people, so this is Steve Massioni, who's our bond agent and who has already done work with us. And I know with the town of Bristol also, Warren?
Yes,
Yes,
yes. Good evening. As the superintendent said, my name is Steve Massaroni from PFM Financial Advisors. I work out of the Boston office, but I cover Rhode Island. I can remember being in this room, I want to say it was in 2006 or 7, talking about the old bonds that are actually going to be paid off pretty soon. And then we did a refinancing of those bonds. So if you turn the slide to existing debt, and this is important. So what this slide shows is you have bonds outstanding for projects that were completed over the past 20 years. Those bonds are retiring in 2028. This 1.6 million is already in the base. It's already in the budgets for both member towns. This is going to go away and will be replaced with the new debt if the district decides to move forward. Right now, it's $1.6 million into the budget. It'll decline in 28 to 858,000, then goes away. So there'll no longer be debt service on the existing bonds. Turn over to the proposed, this slide. I know it's a lot of stuff on this slide, but I just need all this stuff to kind of explain how it works. So we ran 2 scenarios, sort of worst case, 63% reimbursement. The next slide is best case at 78%. And we assumed a project of 200 million. On the left side, if you can see it, we assumed 200 million, 63% reimbursement. As Mario pointed out, you will get a portion PAYGO. The 26,835,000 represents PAYGO, which means you can fund less bonds when it's time to fund the project. What we did for an assumption on the plan of finance is we assumed that you would issue three bond anticipation notes during construction. This is just for illustration purposes. We'll have to review draw schedules, see how quickly or slowly you're going to spend the money, but this will just give you an idea of how it works. So in year 1, you would issue 30 million in bond anticipation notes. You'd have the 26 million available to you for the PAYGO match. You could start your project. At the end of the 1-year period, you'd issue another note. You'd pay off the 30 million, you issue 85, and continue on with the project until you get closer to completion. One of the reasons that we do this is because under current law, the project is not eligible for state aid until it's substantially complete. So if the project's not going to be eligible until 2028, you want to have the bond sync up with the state aid. There is, as Mario pointed out, pending legislation at the General Assembly, which would change that to when the bond is issued. So this slide would look a little bit different if that legislation is passed. In the first few years, you would actually get reimbursement, not on notes, but we probably would issue a bond with interest only during that period, so you wouldn't lose out on the state aid during the construction period. At the end of the day, when you do issue your bond, again, assuming 63% reimbursement, $173 million bond, again, it's supplemented with the PAYGO of 26 million. That gets you the proceeds. The net cost is 4.6 million net of state aid. That's the cost to the 2 member towns. And we'll talk about tax rate impact in a second. One thing I want you to note, though, on this slide, it's gradual. So the debt service in year 1 is 1.1 million. Year 2, 2.7 million. And then it goes up to 3 million before it levels out at the 4.6. Why that is important is because you're not getting hit on the taxes in year 1. It'll be over time. If you look, the biggest jump is from 25 to 26, $1.6 million. The tax rate impact on $1.6 million for Bristol is approximately 2.8%. For Warren, I believe it's about 3% based on a $42 million budget and a $20 million budget. So it'll be a gradual increase. The other thing to note is you're actually going to lose some debt service, the $1.6 million that we talked about. So those percentages actually will come down a little bit as we go, we'll do further planning. If you turn to the next slide, same assumptions as far as bond anticipation notes during construction, but it's 78% state aid reimbursement. And you can see the number, 3.1 million. To Mario's point, the bonuses are huge. You're going from 4.6 to 3.1 based on that 15% increase in the bonuses. PAYGO stays the same. The PAYGO is based on your base rate of 63%. You're not going to get any more PAYGO, but really what moves the needle on the cost to the taxpayers are those bonus points. Again, it goes down by $1.5 million. Just want to talk about interest rates. A lot of people ask me what's going on with interest rates. Are these good assumptions? I don't have a crystal ball. I think they're good assumptions. You'll notice when we did the bond anticipation notes, We started at 375, we ratcheted down. The expectation is after this year, we're going to start to see short-term rates come down. The Fed continues to increase short-term rates. The big picture, though, as far as long-term tax exempt rates, they're not that bad. You hear about recession and inflation of 8%. Long-term tax exempt rates are back to what I would say historic averages. You know, a 20-year bond today is about 350. A 30-year bond today, given the credit of the district and the member towns, probably 410. We ran 450 for the 30-year assumption. That's more of a historical average than it is where we saw rates. You know, 2 years ago, a 30-year bond was 2.5%. So there is some cushion in here. We like to be conservative. We don't like to be overly conservative. But what happens with rising rates, the state's actually picking up a portion, 78% of that cost if rates do go up a bit. Tax rate impact, if you want to just go to the last slide. So again, based on sort of worst case 63% reimbursement, best case 78%, broke it out by both member towns. Total debt service under scenario 1 is 4.6 million. Total net debt service under scenario 2, 3.1. We allocate it based on the budget amount or the budget requirement as far as the percent of pay. And you can see it's for Bristol on worst case 89 cents per thousand, and on best case 60 cents, and then Warren $1.52, and just over $1. Again, on the highest increase of 1.6 from 25, I think it was 25 to 26. I go back, 25 to 26. It's 2.3% on Bristol and approximately 3% on Warren. That's based on today's budget numbers and today's tax rates.
Are these numbers based on the declining state aid as well? Because we are going to propose to be getting less and less as it goes along. So do these numbers reflect that as well?
No, so these numbers reflect the cost to do this project. There's other budget drivers for both member towns, for the school district. This does not take into consideration any of those other budget drivers. This is simply what's this project going to cost at that not to exceed number of $200 million. Happy to
I just had
answer
a
any other.
question on the pay-as-you-go. Could you explain that again to me? I did not.
Sure. When the vote is approved, the first $250 million, then the second $250 million, the purpose of that money was to give districts and towns some upfront money, so they didn't have to put, I think the first study, Jacob's study, was $2.9 billion. Cities and towns can't afford $2.9 billion. So I think the goal, the treasurer and the governor put these bonds before the vote is to give them some upfront money to so that you would have to bond less. Under the old program, cities and towns and districts are required to bond 100% of the cost, and it's a reimbursement program. So now this is a hybrid. When they changed it a few years back, it's a hybrid program. So there's some upfront money, and then you have upfront pay-as-you-go, and then you have over time just the reimbursement that you get now. It's the same way. So the formula that's on the RIDE website, if you put it in at 68% for $200 million, it's going to tell you it's $25 million pay-go. So that's available to you when you start your project. As Mario pointed out, it's based on your share ratio. It's a percentage. So $1 million requisition, the state pays 68% of that, and you pay the difference until you go through all that or use all those funds up, and then you would just use the bond proceeds to continue the project.
Thank you. Yes, Kay?
Sorry, I feel like I'm asking a lot of questions.
No.
In
all
your
good.
tax rate impact, you reference the impact on the tax rate. Do you have any projected impacts on the tax levy, since that's what's we're held to by state?
Yeah, good question. I'm glad you asked. So the slide it's based on the rate. And the reason why I did that is so a resident, if they see that they're paying $13 per thousand, what's this going to cost us? Well, it's an 8% increase, whatever it is. The numbers I just referenced, the 2.3 and the 3%, that is on the levy, because the cap under state law, as you know, is on levy, not on rate.
Do you think you could provide us with those numbers, just since they're not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank
Any other questions, colleagues? No, Jessica, you had a question?
I do have a question, if that's okay.
Yes.
Steve, right? Is it Steve?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If you can refer to page 5 or slide 5, I just had a question. Under the 2027 school bond box, I just looked at line 4. This is for the 63% scenario. Is the 63% on interest only, or is it 63% on the interest and principal total?
Interest and principal.
Okay, so I did the math, and it's not adding up to what the state aid. So can you
Good
just?
question, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so what happens is the PAYGO blends down your reimbursement rate. So the state is giving you the 25 million up front as opposed to over time. So your share ratio does blend down so that it may be, I don't have my model in front
No,
of me,
it's okay.
but it might have been 58% over time. The total package is 63, but the PAYGO is 25, blends down your annual reimbursement.
It wasn't off by much, but that makes
Yeah,
sense now.
that's the reason.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Colleagues, any other questions? No, no. John?
I don't have a, can you hear this?
Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I just want to make sure I have the formula right. So Steve, you said the first 3 years would be PAYGO, period ending June 30th of 25. So that's next budget year. So if we go out to bond for the whole 200 million, which is probably, hopefully not likely, but it's possible, we're looking at a $1.125 million increase for next budget year between Bristol and Warren. And then the following year, it increases about 1.5 million, an additional 1.5 million, and then another 500,000 or so. And then we get to 2028, and then we get a drop off of, was it 1.6 million from existing debt? And the other thing to remember too is this is a 60-cent increase at 3.1, but it's gradual. So it's about, for example, for Bristol, 60-cent increase, but we're looking at more like a 25-cent increase, another 25, and then maybe a 15. Am I understanding?
Yep, that's exactly right.
So it's
Yeah.
it's smooth. It's more of a gradual. Because when I first looked at this, I said, "Jesus, 60-cent
Right.
increase. That's over our 4% cap. This isn't. It's not possible."
Right.
But this is a gradual increase over time, and then when we get to the fourth or fifth year, we drop off the other debt. So it helps us out.
It helps a little bit. But one thing just to keep in mind, this is for illustration purposes. You could, the first note of 30 million, it could be 10 million. Once you have your construction draw schedule, when you issue notes, all you do is you issue what you need for 12 months. A note is it can be up to 12 months, anytime up to 12 months. So if the construction draw schedule says that you need, $20 million, you only have to cover the difference between the 63%. You only have to fund 27%. So these numbers may be a little bit lower. They may be a little bit higher if it's a very aggressive timetable. But I think the big point is at the end of the day, when the project's complete, the 4.6 and the 3.1 are the real numbers as far as the total cost at the end of the day. How we get there is going to change. It's going to change based on interest rates, how quickly you spend the money. I mean, one thing in this environment that we're finding out, if you issue a note today, the note might be 4%, but you reinvested it 4.5%, positive arbitrage. And what's happening is that the interest on those notes can help offset the debt service in the first few years. The interest on the project, not unfortunately, but per ride regulations, has to go towards debt service. You can't spend it on the project. So, again, we use pretty conservative assumptions. We didn't factor in investment income because that can help the numbers in the first few years. This plan of finance will be tightened up over the next 12 months before you're ready to go. But this is, again, your point, Steve, is correct, though. It is gradual over the first 3 years.
And the terms are 30 years?
Yeah, so what we're assuming is a 30-year bond for this, given the size. So I believe the first bond was a 20-year bond for the district. Most communities go anywhere from 20 to 30 years, depending on, number one, the useful life, and number two, what the budget impact is and what the interest rate environment is. The yield curve is fairly flat. It's inverted in some spots. Given the size of this project, a 30-year bond makes sense.
And I see the 2024 bond anticipation note is, so that's 3.75 for, my understanding, 30 years.
No, it's for 1 year. So,
1 year.
yeah, exactly. So the note is just a 1-year instrument.
Okay.
So again, at the end of the first period, the 30 million, you'd issue 85 million, you'd pay off the 30, and then you have an additional 55 million to continue with the project. So you would roll these bond anticipation notes till the project's complete.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And if I could just add, so the bond cap's not arbitrary. It's a cap that's affordable for the town so that you can stay at a number that makes sense for both Bristol and Warren. So that's why it's not 500 million, or, why don't we say, just in case, we'll put this number on the table. Our cap is a number that's affordable for both towns. Again, it's not the amount we want to spend. We hope we can spend less, but with costs today, we'll have to wait to see what our plans are. And we may have to make some tough choices to get to a number that we can all be happy with and support. But we've given our designers, our architects, a cap of, we don't want to see anything that's going to cost us more than this. So then there'll be some options between that where we can choose what's best for Bristol Warren.
And can you just explain tonight the non-binding bond cap versus the binding?
I think Sandy can
Yeah,
do that. Yeah, we have our attorney.
Good
She'll go through
segue.
the motion and the resolution. She'll explain that to all of you, and she'll talk about that.
Okay. Colleagues, any other questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I thought Steve was going to be on vacation today, so I'm so excited that he came and joined
Thanks,
us.
Steve.
Hello, everyone. I'm
Hello.
Sandy Mack.
Welcome.
I'm bond counsel. I've actually done all of the bond issues for the district since 1996. And I can tell Council Sweeney that this wasn't the original cafeteria. The original cafeteria when I was here was right outside between Building A and Mary, right? Right before you went outside. So there's been some changes. Any event.
We do.
You've had a lot of information about the project. I'm here to walk you through what is the action that you're taking today. And you've got a copy of the legislation, you've got a copy of the resolution. When we go out for bonding under the district, under the enabling legislation of the district, it requires both the approval of the Joint Finance Committee and the approval of the school committee. So we can't even get to the legislation to the General Assembly until both bodies have approved that. That is the first step in a very long process. The only thing that is being done by the vote today is allowing the legislation to be introduced in the General Assembly. You've done your part. Then the legislators need to work it through Leg Council. They need to make sure it's in the proper form. They need to do all this before the session ends and have the General Assembly approve it. Then they've done their part. And then there's a few steps in between about how you get it on the ballot. At that point in the November election of this year, not next year because of David Cicilline's career change, then it goes to the voters. Still, nothing happens because the voters, a majority of the voters in the district must approve in the affirmative. At that point, with all those steps along the way, the last step is still not the last step. The voters, if they approve it, and it's a majority of the voters in the district, now you have the ability to issue notes or bonds. Steve mentioned a plan of finance. Mario has mentioned different ways of financing projects. Hopefully, as the legislative process and the voter process is progressing, the teams that are on and identifying the scope, identifying the areas where the bonus may be applicable, identifying of the 100 and some odd projects, what are the ones that we want to finance and how much money. That all comes together again, and it comes before you and it comes before the school committee. So no bonds can be issued until the school committee takes all the information from not just the team, the development team here, but RIDE and PFM and bond counsel. And most likely in that conversation, there will be a lot of discussions about where the interest rates are, what time, when do you need the money? Can you invest it with some positive arbitrage to reduce the cost of the project? Is there a project that is going to go so swiftly that you need more money than less? All those decisions are made in the context of an actual project and the atmosphere, the financial, economic conditions of the time. So I just want to be very careful that as you consider this, that you recognize this is just one step in a very long process. And the real critical vote, if you get that far and the voters approve it, is going to be when all the work is done, the projects identified, you have bids, you know how much you're going to spend, and then you make a decision as to how much and for what purpose. I say that because 200 million sounds like a lot of money. It is. But in the context of multiple buildings, if you think about over the course since 1996, the number of projects that this district has financed through bonds, it's up there. 12 million here, 9 million here, 5 million here, series of short-term bonds. So the difference between the way you've approached it in the past and now is that you have a one-time opportunity to seize on a high reimbursement rate together with the bonus that just makes it economically feasible to do more. But that doesn't mean you're going to do more or have to do more because it's a not to exceed 200 million. And as some of you know, when I come to you before the town, we always put a cap on the authority so that for planning purposes, if nothing else, the project has to come within the scope of the authority. So you have the vote. I think I've explained that this is a vote that is merely to pass the legislation off to the legislators and then introduction into the General Assembly. It does require your vote to do it. It was passed the school committee in the affirmative 2 nights ago. A couple of things happened after that school committee vote, and I changed both the resolution before you and the legislation. To provide more flexibility within the legislation and within the vote so that you're not approving for a new high school and additions to other or renovations to other, but it could be a new high school, renovation of an existing high school, or the hybrid. So I've made that really clear. After watching the presentation on Monday, I realized that my drafting didn't match what was being discussed. So that was changed. So before you today has that hybrid model, 1, A, B, or C. The legislation itself is very consistent with the legislation I've drafted for you in the past. It is different from a city or town council or a building school committee because you're a district. And so we start with your enabling legislation and what does the enabling legislation say you can do, and then we build off that. Some of the changes from the last year, and I'm sorry, this is a repeat for the school committee members that already heard this. There's a couple of changes that I've added here. There are some communities that have bonds legislation and they use a little of it and they use a little more of it and they use a little more of it and it becomes stale, but it's still valid for a long period of time. So we have a sunset provision in here, and it requires both the passage of time and an affirmative vote of the committees to say, you know what, even though the voters passed 200 million, we're fine. We did these projects on 150 million. We don't want to spend the extra money. So you can affirmatively in the future sunset that legislation. I'm not sure I would recommend that, but you do have that opportunity. The legislation also allows for bonding not only through RIBEC, which is the way that RIDE reimburses. Your bonds have to be issued through RIBEC. But also there is another, and I think both towns have financed through the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. So you're both aware of those programs. They have resiliency programs. They have efficient building programs. It's a subsidized rate. So if you have a project cost that's not eligible under a RIDE program, it could very well be, if it relates to energy or resiliency, drainage. I don't think drinking water would be for you, but all those projects are projects that could be financed at a subsidized rate through RIB. So you have that opportunity in the legislation as well. And with that, I'll take questions.
I actually have two questions. The referendum, does that need to pass just by a majority of votes, or does each community need to approve it?
The legislation says a majority of votes in the district. And so I think what happens is, and so you have polling places in both Bristol and Warren. I think the tally is of all of the votes in the district, not the majority of Bristol and a majority of Warren. I think that's the way it was done in the past.
Okay. And the other question I have is, if we vote tonight to authorize up to 200 million, does it ever come back to this committee, or is it strictly in the hands of the school committee after that to spend up to $200 million?
No, it absolutely has to come back before you. Your enabling legislation provides, so that's the legislation, the charter that enacted it. Section 10 of the legislation says, if you're going to issue bonds, it can only happen when and if authorized by the Joint Finance Committee, hereinafter provided for, after approval by the voters. So the school committee does all the hard work, and then this body actually has the ultimate approval for what is a yay or a nay.
Okay, so the final, it's up to 200 million, but say they come back with 100 million, which need to be cleared by this committee before it was actually went out to bond.
Yes, for each bond issue. In other words, if you just do a piece of it at 25, it has to come before you. If there's a second piece at 35 or 100, it has to come before you. Each plan of finance under this legislation has to come before you.
So we definitely have another bite at the apple. You know, this isn't the only vote, and a lot more discussion, obviously. So.
And it makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of information, I mean, that's before you today, and you couldn't possibly make a judgment as to how to spend funds without a lot more of the work that's being done. So, and frankly, a year from now, I think, I mean, I'm with Steve, I think there's going to be a different interest rate environment, whether it's higher or lower, I can't tell, but it will be different. And so the recommendations that will be made by the finance team, which would include both town councils as well as PFM and us, would be based on those conditions. So there's a lot that goes in how you finance something that's behind the scenes. It's just a lot of work.
I just have a question in regards to town resolutions. The JFC has made up majority of Bristol, and I would love to see that the Warren full town council have a chance to review that. I know due to the timing with the legislation, depending on the way my colleagues want to vote tonight, could each town do their own resolution and send that in? That way it could really be heard by equally both.
So historically, I think for every bond issue, and you'll see that in the resolution, I provide that upon passage by both bodies, that it be referred to the town councils of each member town for consideration and/or endorsement. In other words, talk about it. If you feel so inclined, endorse, because frankly, when in the General Assembly, before they spend the energy to have the legislation go through the process, they want to know that the member towns are behind it as well. But it's not a condition. In other words, if either member town says, you know what, it's a busy summer, we don't need to deal with this until after the fact, that's not a condition to it going to the General Assembly and being approved. Yeah. If this were to pass tonight, the next action item would be a referral. There's a place for the secretaries of the Joint Finance and the school committee to sign, and then that would be sent by the administration to the town clerks of each of the towns and asked that it be placed in the next agenda item for a next agenda item. And the reason for that is you want to give exposure to the projects, ahead of time, not just when it comes time to vote in November. So there's a method behind this.
We'll be taking our show on the road. We'll be ready to present to both. We do want to, I think you heard both PMA say this, our architects say this, you're hearing Sandy say, communication's the key. So we're going to try to be everywhere that we can be to share all along the way so that nobody shows up the ballot in November and goes, what's happening? What is this? Who's talking about this? We want to make sure we continue to inform everyone throughout the process.
Sandy, can I just ask a question? So in terms of the legislation, because the legislators who are not here today are so used to making sure they have the resolutions from the towns, but it's not necessary for them to move forward for this, and time is of the essence. Will you be it's more of an issue with Warren, I think, than it is for Bristol because most of us are here. Will you be sitting down with the legislators and explaining this process to them so that they understand that it's the vote of the school committee and the joint finance committee, and it doesn't really, it's nice to have the other, but it's not necessary.
So I'm going to say we, but my illustrious chair has done much of the conversation with our legislators. So we have both, someone in both houses who's ready to sponsor the bill, and they're well aware that according to our enabling legislation, it's the school committee's approval, joint finance, and they're ready to go. Like, I'm sure they're waiting for my email right now to get this so they can submit it, because the timeline it's crunch time for them. They have to get it in before the session's over. So they're both very prepared.
If I may, our legislators are in fact watching online.
Yes. Well, we had asked Senator Feelag to join us, but he had another commitment, so he wasn't able, but he was going to come and speak on behalf of the project. So unfortunately, he was unable to attend, but yes, they are in support and are ready to submit our legislation.
And I'm available to answer any questions or to walk through why it's written the way it's written, because it reads differently than a city or town, because it's a district. And because, as I said, the starting basis for the legislation is your enabling statute. So
if I may,
Of
Mr.
course.
Chair,
Yeah.
a couple things.
Okay.
First, I had a whole bunch of questions, and I waited till the end, and you answered, if not all of them, and some of you asked the same questions that I had, so thank you. Couple things. First is, this is a whole lot of money, or potentially a whole lot of money. We've talked about the impact to both communities is impressive, potentially very challenging, but also an impact of an improved school has a tremendous impact, and we understand that too. I'm concerned about that. I like the stopgaps here. I think that if this committee decides to vote in the affirmative, that it's important that, and I'm going to say it as part of discussion if the motion is made, that this is neither supporting a particular project or next step, just taking that next step, is not against it either, but to be emphatically clear. Something else that was mentioned a few times, I forgot who, it was you, that had mentioned there would be a tax calculator. That's not enough. I want, and I'm sure my colleagues do too, is emphatic, in your face, this is what is being proposed. We're assuming it's an outstanding idea, but this is what it cost. I want those connected very clearly. So when the voters are by themselves, when no one is advocating for a shiny new building, they understand that there's a lot of people that we all represent that can afford this with no problem. There's a whole bunch of people who can't. So it's imperative that we are emphatically clear. The other thing is that up to 200 million, I don't know where the 200 million came from. I know that question was asked a couple of times. I understand why we're asking for more, but again, it is super important that if we want to stay so much lower than that, we need to find opportunities to save money. John, you had mentioned, does this include increases such and so forth? That's going to happen, right? And this is a tremendous increase. I keep saying it that way. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but if not shared correctly, so people know what they're truly voting on, because we talk about 200 million like it's nothing. We approved a multi-million-dollar budget for this school, and people trust that we're making good decisions, and they should trust. But they have serious impacts. So I just wanted to get that out there. I support taking the next steps. In fact, if Mr. Chair will allow, I'd like to make a motion to do that, and possibly there's a second, with those words attached, that we're not supporting a particular project, just the next steps, and it's imperative that we're so clear with the public of what this is actually going to cost. So with that,
I was just going to open the floor up to the public just to see if they had any comment, just so make sure we're completely transparent. But before I do that, do my colleagues have any other questions for bond counsel? Okay. All right. Thank you, Sandy.
I just have a comment, not a question.
Of course.
I think we got to look at some other benefits of an investment. First of all, we'll probably never see this again.
Right.
With a reimbursement of up to 78%. Could be potentially $156 million worth of investment into Bristol and Warren. And the way I look at the school district is we're losing students. We're losing students, and we're still paying for those students. We're losing aid. I think we need the investment. And we look at this building. There are times we say it's not half bad, but when you look at modern schools, you realize that it's time for an upgrade. You got to look at the savings with energy efficiency. This building is not energy efficient. I think there's one boiler room, and it tries to heat all the wings of the building. It wasn't designed for New England weather. So I think it is a lot of money, but I think we would be short-sighted if we don't look at this as an investment. And again, I'm comfortable from what I've heard, high level, of how we would be able to finance this and be mindful of tax increases. I think we can do it, but I don't think we can afford not to do this. So I'm in support. If someone's making the motion, I'd be happy to second it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I reinforce what Mr. Administrator said? I come at this from the perspective of an educator myself. I've taught in some of the worst classrooms. I've taught in some of the best classrooms. But one of the things I can tell you is that the physical environment in which students learn is an important part of the equation in which they do learn. And so we do have to take that into consideration. And I think we have to really take a hard look around us and ask ourselves, is this the best that we can give our students? And we are making some investments in our CTE programs. If we don't want students to leave our district anymore, as the town administrator said, we need to find ways to achieve cost containment, and whether it be bringing folks over here or students over here, or keeping students over here and keeping them from going out of district because maybe there's better facilities somewhere, better athletic facilities and things like that. And then, also I think, we just want to build on some of our recent accomplishments that we've already had. And I think that ultimately, like I said, to finish up my point, is that the physical environment is one of the factors in which that has an impact on student learning. And if we're going to be able to demonstrate successful, scores and demonstrate successful student learning outcomes, the physical learning environment is going to be a key part of that equation. So,
yes,
Mr. Chairman. Well, I have to concur with our chairman as well as the administrator. The chairman, in terms of, we have to proceed with caution and be very clear with our residents what the cost is if we are to proceed. On the other hand, someone who worked in this building for 31 years and talk about flooding, walk through the hallways and have to roll up your pants and to walk through some of them. It was not easy. I know exactly where it stands. So, and as it was stated, the heating systems and many of the upgrades that are much needed. I remember the gymnasium settling about this much, going into the locker room and part of the gymnasium. So much needs to be done and we need to move forward, but again, with caution. So I support.
Great.
Can I just say, I think that I agree with a lot of what's been said by everyone, but I think the main thing is something needs to be done. We're not really sure what, whether it's renovation, whether it's upgrades, whether it's repairs, that needs to all be determined. But I think it is important to note that we're not making a decision to move forward and say, we're going to spend this X number of dollars. We're just moving forward that we put this before the public, who is the right to make that determination. And, and try to be as clear as we can, as others have said, as to what impact that will be on their tax rate. I think the point that our administrator, Steve, that you made earlier about the gradual impact, I think is so probably the most important thing one of the most important things that was said tonight, because I looked at that at some point and, in Warren, it's like, what, $500 a year or, something like that, or 800, that's a lot. And so I think that's like sort of incremental, as we going. I think that's important to know. And I do think that the 200 million, I understand why we're doing it. I don't really have an objection to it. I do think that sometimes, I think we just want to, I don't know if we can say clearly enough that we don't intend to spend that much if we can help it. Sometimes wow, I got a budget of 200 million. So if I came in at 190, that would be great, but maybe I could have got it done for 150. So I think we just have to be mindful of that as well. It's not easy for our folks right now in these communities because, as you all know, if you've lived here for any length of time, property is going like crazy, and many people are figuring out how they can continue to live in the community in which they've grown up. So I think we need to move forward on this, let the public decide, but.
Great, thank you for your comments. Warren colleagues, do you have anything you want to put in?
I think it's a great idea. My big concern is with my constituents who are Warren residents. With this being, with the referendum being a simple majority, if my constituents vote against it, they're stuck with it. That's my concern. I'm hoping we don't get up to that 200 million because that's going to be devastating for the town of Warren. Even though it's gradual, the projections, I think, that your typical $250,000 home would be an $1,100 increase with all these bonds and finance. I've got a lot of older couples that's still living in their house, and that $1,100 is going to make them move. So, like I said, my concern is that it's after this vote, and it's pretty much out of the hands of the majority of the Warren voters. So that's my concern. I'm not saying I'm not in favor of it. I'm just expressing my concern that once this vote is taken, it's kind of out of the hands of my constituents.
Okay, Gary, good.
I absolutely stand by what President Hanley has said. And I hope that everybody who's here and everybody who's listening and our legislators in the state maybe takes this as yet another red flag that we might not be doing this right, that we are left as this little teeny tiny school district, one of how many? Too many, and we're shouldering this burden ourselves. This shouldn't be on us to do it this way. We're not going to make a change tonight, but my goodness, when are we going to come to the reality that we've got too many school districts and too much sort of administration happening redundantly, and if we maybe came together, reduce the number of school districts, put buildings and infrastructure on the state, and focused on the things that are really important, like educating our students, we wouldn't be thinking about how our seniors and how our economically challenged citizens are going to be pushed out of their homes and not be able to stay living in our community. What are we doing? Like, when are we going to actually make some significant, important, critical changes to the way that we educate our students in this state and stop thinking like we're the biggest state, not the smallest? It's ponderous to me. And I think that we're moving in the right direction, and this clearly has to happen. And I'm glad that the adults in the room are saying, let's not spend 200 million. Let's look for the best possible design and let's get the most bang for our buck. But come on now, why are we, so many of us sitting in these rooms trying to figure our way through this when we could be much stronger together? And yeah.
Can I just make one comment about that? Because Carrie, earlier when someone said, you know, all these other towns are coming to the table, there may not be enough, like, you know, depends when you get in there early, make sure, get whatever you need. I was thinking, why isn't there an economy of scale? Like, I mean, if 10 school districts or 15 school districts or 20 are going to be doing building projects, why aren't we like linking up with them? And like, if we come to a architectural firm or a building and say, okay, we need a better price because we're going to give you a job of 3 schools to build and 3 communities to do projects in. What can you do for us? I mean, to me, that seems like, I wanted to ask that when I heard it, and then you brought that point up, and I was like, exactly, I was thinking exactly the same thing. And I don't know if anybody has an answer to that. It's kind of like, it set up a system right now where we're all competing. So, you know, the environment's like, wow, there's all this work coming, so we can charge more money because everybody needs to get this done to get the reimbursement, blah, blah, blah. They have a timeline. They have to get it done by 2028, whatever. And instead of sort of making it like, okay, what can we do either well, Rhode Island's not a big place, as we all know, but, you know, regionally, East Bay, there's this many projects in East Bay. You've mentioned East Providence, you mentioned Barrington. I have no idea what's going on in Aquidneck Island. I mean, everybody's looking at these issues all around the state. Some have been doing it for a long time. Pawtucket, Bristol, Warren, all been doing stuff for a long time. And we just need to, I don't know if there's a way to like work that out so that we're not competing with each other, that we're kind of working together and we're getting a better price because we're going in together. Do you have anything to say about that point? I don't know if you have any comments on that, anybody? Any thoughts? Did that come up before? I'm sure it has.
I'll respond and say, I think it's a great idea. So I think it's a great idea.
One suggestion, Bill, on that. It would be difficult to band everyone together, but I think your architects working with North Kingston, for example, maybe you can pick 1 or 2 communities who are on the same timeline doing something inside, you might do something there. I know the states try to do like bulk purchasing for supplies, but it's very hard to get 36 communities to play along, even though they're saving, which is very difficult. But you know, many are different stages at the beginning, but I do find, you know, a few who are like you, perhaps who have either the same contractors, they want to use that, or the same architects. We'll do something to do.
I mean, in a way, it's good if people are in a little bit different stage. Like if they can agree on like the architect and on the project management, if it's a little bit behind is okay because they may not have enough crews to like build everything at one time. But I do think that that's something that needs to be looked at, especially right now. I don't think it happens all the time, but because you have this big incentive, everybody's been on board for this, looking at this and is trying to move forward on the buildings. And since we've had the reports on the safe and warm and dry in the situation of schools, I do think it would be worth looking at some of that.
Carrie and Mary, I think you bring up a lot of good points, and that's definitely maybe something we can definitely consider further down in the design about best utilizing fields and cafeterias and everything and consolidating if that's possible. So I think those are really good thoughts, and I appreciate all my colleagues with their comments as well. If nobody has anything else to say at this point, I'm just going to open the floor up to the public really quickly, just to make sure that we cover everybody in the room that has anything to say. Does anybody out there have anything that they would like to say at this time? Okay. Okay, great.
So I'd like to make a motion, if I may.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like to read?
So I'm going to read this right from Sandy's paper to see if I get it right. Okay. To authorize the preparation of legislation by Mac Law Associates LLC, bond counsel pursuant to which the Bristol Warren Regional School District would be authorized to borrow up to $200 million in bonds and notes in anticipation thereof to finance the construction and/or renovation of a new high school to be located in the district and renovations to the following existing district schools: Mount Hope High School, Kickamuit Middle School, Colt Andrews Elementary School, Gutierrez Elementary School, Hugh Cole Elementary School, and Rockwell Elementary School, and that the legislation be introduced as soon as possible into the current session of the General Assembly for passage.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
I do have a question. You specifically said new high school in that motion. Isn't one of the possibilities of a renovation or a hybrid? Do we need to reword that?
So yeah, and the third line says thereof to finance the construction and/or renovation of a new high school.
Yeah. Covers both. Yeah.
You're pretty good, Sandy.
Good job. Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Congratulations. Great. Thank you very much. I just want to thank everybody for their hard work and their omnispective insight in this huge mammoth project. Again, this is one step and many more steps to come, but I appreciate all your hard work on everything. And could I have a motion to adjourn?
I'm sorry, before you adjourn, I missed one important introduction. I have a new CFO, folks. This is Danielle Carey. She is
Welcome,
our new
Danielle.
CFO. So this is her first meeting with all of you. She just started, about a week ago. So she is new on board, but you'll be seeing a lot more of the two of us clearly with all of this going on. But I'm really excited to have Danielle on board. She comes to us previously from doing municipal work in Smithfield, and then before that at DOR. So she has lots of experience with UCOA, but also with all of the financing and all of the work that goes on in towns, which brings a wealth of information to us at the school side. So we're very excited to have her on board. So I'm sorry, I missed her introduction at the
it's
beginning.
okay.
So
Welcome, Danielle. We're happy to have you on board.
thank you.
Welcome.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to
Second.
Second, Tony. I don't think there's any discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you very much. You guys
Thank
have a
you.
great night and a great summer. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.